Hey guys, Soberoni of G&A Reviews here with part 2 of my NeroFest event guide. This is going to cover all of the challenge quests, aka the exhibition matches. If you want a better overview of the event proper, like what craft essences you need and what farming strategy to use, then make sure you check out part 1 of this event guide, linked in the description below, and it'll be linked at the end of this video. This is strictly for the challenge quests. One thing I do want to make clear about the challenge quest is that they're going to be the hardest quest that we've ever gotten on FGO NA by far. Not everyone is going to have the ability to do them, especially if you're a newer player, or even if you're an older player but don't have the best lineup of servants. It's very, very difficult. Another thing I do want to mention is that you're absolutely going to need a max limit broken Princess of the White Rose craft essence for all of these. No exceptions. You're going to need it. These exhibition quests are not going to be unlocked all at once. They're going to come one at a time. Every day a new exhibition match is going to unlock until a total of 7 are available. You have the entire event to do them. There's no hard limit on attempts. They only cost 1 AP, so you can repeat them as much as you want. However, once you do complete them, they are done forever. So they're only able to be completed once. They're not farmable. With all of that said, let's get right into talking about them one at a time in chronological order, starting with Herc. So the very first challenge quest available is going to be Herc and the 12 Labors. It's going to be a 3-wave fight. The first 2 waves just consist of golems. They're berserker class. They have fairly high HP, but not too crazy. Mostly what you're going to want to use this wave for is to build up your NP for wave 3. Wave 3 is going to be the Herc fight. He's going to have 242,000 HP. In addition to that, he's also going to have 2 major skills. The first one is going to decrease the arts card effectiveness of all of your allies. So as soon as you get into battle, every one of your allies in the front row is going to have their arts card effectiveness completely debuffed, making it a lot harder to use arts servants against him. But his other major skill and the whole gimmick for the fight is he's going to have 12 lives. So he's going to have 11 guts activated. There's no way to remove this effect, so every time he dies, he's going to come back with 50% HP, which is about 130,000 HP. So while that might not seem like a lot of HP, just keep in mind that he has 12 lives, so it does add up. Another thing to keep a lookout for in this quest is he can use evade, which makes it very difficult to pin him down. He might even spam it on a couple of turns, so it does come down to a bit of RNG. Just keep in mind you might want a servant that can pierce through evade, or you might want an evade piercing craft essence just to cover yourself if he does decide to spam it. He can also melt a lot of servants in a single turn because he's a berserker. If he crits anyone, they're probably going to die. One of the major ways to deal with this fight is to mix up your attackers. As you know, whenever you do an attack chain, the enemy does not die until the end of that chain. So doing something like Noble Phantasming first and then having your attack chain after might be able to take 2 lives from him in 1 turn. You're going to try to minimize the overkill damage that you do to try to just kill him as many times in 1 turn as possible. But you're also going to want to put a heavy emphasis on stalling. Like I said, he can kill servants very, very quickly, so your stall game is going to be key. You're going to need stuns, you're going to need to buff your defense, you're going to need invincibility, all of that good stuff. One of Herc's major weaknesses though is his traits. He is both male and divine. There are many servants in this game who have anti-male and anti-divine attacks, so make sure you exploit those for maximum damage. And although he does have an arts down effect when you enter the battle, it only hits your front row. So if you keep your arts servants like Uriel and Orion in the back row, they're not going to be hit by that arts down debuff, which means that you can swap them in or they can come in later and clean house. The basic strategy here is going to be to stall out as much as possible and aim to do a minimum of 130,000 damage per turn. This is absolutely why the event craft essence is so key here. You're going to need that craft essence max limit broken to even maintain that level of damage every turn. I recommend going in with 1 damage dealer, preferably someone who has an anti-male trait, and 2 supports. Make sure your supports are focused on stunning and stalling. Specifically for damage, I'm going to recommend Uriel, Orion, Medb, and Tamamo Lancer. They all have very strong anti-male attacks. If you're using Uriel or Orion, make sure you keep them in your back row. In addition to those though, you can also go with Jolter, Ozymandias, Kentucky Rider, Kuro, or Scathach. They all have very high burst damage. They should all easily be capable of dealing that 130,000 damage. If you want to do something a little bit different, you can also go with Squirtoria, Medb, or Mordred. They're going to have a lot of Noble Phantasm spamming, so they can practically Noble Phantasm every single turn, which is going to give you a lot of sustained damage and a better ability to take multiple lives from Herc per turn. However, they're all art servants, so make sure you keep them in your back row. Defensively, I heavily recommend Waver, Mosh, Tamamo, Jean, Steno, and Hans. Waver, Mosh, Tamamo, Hans, and John are just top tier support servants. They're going to give you a lot of defense and a lot of stalling. Steno is there because Herc is male. Steno's going to have a field day constantly chain stunning him. Finally, as a Mystic Code, I heavily recommend using Battlesuit. It's going to give you a stun, which buys you an extra turn, which can potentially equal 2 extra lives taken from Herc. So that's very useful. And it also gives you a swap so that you can swap in art servants that you have in the back row. So with Herc covered, let's talk about trial number 2. Trial number 2 is going to be against Scathach and Cu. Just like last trial, there's going to be 3 waves. The first 2 waves are going to be goblins and werewolves, all Lancer class. And then finally in wave 3, you're going to face a 306,000 HP Cu and a 518,000 HP Scathach. As soon as you enter this third wave, Scathach is going to inflict NP seal on your entire front row for 3 turns. So that prohibits you from just Noble Phantasming as soon as you enter the fight. In addition to that, Cu and Scathach have one other gimmick, in that if you kill one of them before the other, then whoever's left standing is going to inflict death on your entire front row, and then if you're still alive after that, they're going to have a buff to their attack, crit rate, and all of their normal attacks will also give them a chance to inflict death. Basically, if you leave one of them alive, they're just going to kill your entire party. There's nothing you can do about it. They're going to get all the crits, they're going to kill you with their normal attacks instantly. You just have to kill them both at the same time. Keep in mind that death goes through evade and invincibility. There is no way to prevent yourself from being instant killed. It's a status ailment, and both Cu and Scathach have Noble Phantasms that inflict death. So if either of them Noble Phantasm someone, they're gonna die, regardless of what you do. And if that wasn't challenging enough, both of them have evade, and they will spam evade constantly. Cu in particular is always going to cast protection from arrows every single turn. So all of that makes this a very challenging quest, but there are still good ways to deal with it. First of all, keep in mind that you have to kill them both at the same time, and Scathach has a lot more HP, so you're going to want to focus your attacks on her so that you can bring her HP down to roughly the same level as Cu. Another thing to keep in mind is that Cu has 3 charge bars, which means turn 4 he's going to Noble Phantasm, which is the same turn that you can Noble Phantasm, so you're going to want to have this fight done by that turn, which means stalling is not going to be a factor that much. You're still going to want some support for this fight because otherwise they will melt you, but since their instant death mechanics go through invincibility and evade, there's no point in stalling them. You're just going to have to rush them down. So that means the best thing to bring with you for this fight is AoE Sabers or an AoE Berserker that you can do massive amounts of damage to both of them at the same time. You absolutely need an AoE Saber or AoE Berserker to make this work. You're also going to want some kind of way to hit through evade. Since Cu is always going to have that active, make sure you have either a craft essence that allows you to pierce through evade for someone, or you have some kind of buff removal. But you're still going to want that Princess of the White Rose craft essence equipped to your main attacker. Another way of dealing with this is also to use debuff removal to get rid of the NP seal. As far as your formation is concerned, I highly recommend only bringing 1 support and 2 attackers. Offense is going to be more important than defense here because you're going to want to make sure that you are able to do 200,000 damage to Scathach before Cu Noble Phantasms you. And because stalling isn't quite as effective for this fight, your support is going to be more focused on removing buffs from the enemies or debuffs from your allies. As far as damage dealers are concerned, I recommend bringing Mordred, Altera, Artoria, Saber Alter, Nero, or Shiki. All of them are AoE Sabers that can deal a good amount of damage. You should make sure if you do use one of them that they have the max limit broken Princess of the White Rose Craft Essence, because they're going to be your main source of damage, and they're going to be your finisher. If you don't have those sabers, you might want to bring a Berserker like Raiko, Fran, or Lancelot. However, keep in mind, they're going to melt. If they get crit once, which they will, they're going to die. So you have to get very lucky for them to not get targeted. Defensively, I recommend Waver, Tamamo, Steno, and Edison. Waver and Tamamo are staples, as always. Steno does a good job of dealing with Cu, so you can stall out his Noble Phantasm just a couple of extra turns, and Edison can do the same with his NP seal. As for Mystic Codes, definitely want to go with either Royal Brand or Brilliant Summer, because both of those will give you Evade Pierce, which I've mentioned comes in handy for this, especially for your final attack. If you're going to use your final AoE Noble Phantasm, you can just slap that Evade Pierce on your main attacker and it will hit both of them. So with that said, let's go on to trial number 3. Trial number 3 is going to be against a bunch of Hassans. Specifically, there's going to be about 38 Hassans that you're going to have to face in order. Some Hassans have HP as low as 10,000, while others have HP as high as 120,000. They're going to all be assassins, so casters are good to bring with you here. But the main focus of this fight is going to be a fight against debuffs. And that's because each Hassan has a special debuff that they inflict upon you when they die. Killing any of the normal Hassans is going to result in a defense debuff on whoever killed them, and also a debuff to Quick Arts or Buster. These debuffs last for 3 turns, but because you're going to be killing so many Hassans so rapidly, they're going to stack up. In addition to that though, the main Hassans, aka Cursed Arm Hassan, Serenity, and Hassan of the 100 Faces, are going to have a special instant death debuff that they inflict upon whoever kills them. In order to get rid of that effect, you actually have to remove the buff from the Hassan, which makes buff removal just as important as debuff removal for this fight. This fight is going to be all about patience and managing the order in which you kill enemies, the pace which you kill enemies, and how good you are at strategizing your buff and debuff removal. In addition to all of that though, the final Hassan that comes out is going to have a special buff that inflicts death to all of your allies if they're killed without that buff being removed. So absolutely prioritize removing the instant death buffs from all of these Hassans. The Hassans individually aren't much of a threat, just make sure that you're able to remove any debuffs on your main attacker so that the defense down doesn't stack up, and make sure you focus on any of the Hassans who are about to Noble Phantasm. Remember, they all have a 3-turn NP charge bar, and if they get off a Noble Phantasm on someone who has a bunch of defensive debuffs on them, they're going to OHKO them. This is going to be a very long and very grindy battle. You cannot rush this battle, you have to be patient. But healing and buff and debuff removal are going to be key for this fight. That's why I recommend bringing 2 supports and 1 attacker, because the supports are going to be much more important than the offensive attacker. In terms of an attacker though, I do recommend using either Medb or Amakusa. They are both absolutely OP for this. Medb because she can remove buffs from anyone with her Rule Breaker, and she can spam her Rule Breaker, which means she's not going to have any problem just picking off all the Hassans. And the Makusa for the same exact reason. He can remove buffs from the entire enemy party with his Noble Phantasm. So they are both the best choices for this fight. However, you can also bring Helena, Da Vinci, or Nidochris. All of them can NP spam, and they have AoE damage and are good for killing mobs. As far as defensive servants, which is more important in my opinion for this fight, you're going to want Iris Veil, Media Lily, Tamamo, Hans, and John. They're all top choices. You're going to need heals, you're going to need guts, and you're going to need debuff removal. All of them have it. Mosh and Waver are also very good choices for this. Defensive buffs are good, and stalling is good, however, they're not as important as debuff removal. And that's also why the best Mystic Code for this fight is going to be Atlas. It gives you debuff removal, and it also decreases the skill cooldowns. So if someone has debuff removal or buff removal on a skill, it's going to make that skill easier to use and more readily available. So with that out of the way, let's talk about trial number 4. Trial number 4 is going to pit you against Siegfried. It's going to be 3 waves, just like the first 2 trials. The first 2 waves are just going to be wyverns, who you should be using as fodder to build up your Noble Phantasm from. And then finally, in the 3rd wave, you're going to face Siegfried with 50,000 HP and 2 wyverns with 100,000 HP. Siegfried is going to have 2 major gimmicks, the first of which is as soon as you enter the battle, he is going to have his NP bar full and he's going to NP on his turn right away. So you're going to get hit with an AoE Noble Phantasm immediately as soon as you enter wave 3. But more importantly than that, Siegfried is a defensive specialist. First and foremost, he has a permanent 200% defensive buff, and he has a 90% damage reduction. So what does that mean? Well, you know how certain servants have the ability to pierce through defense with their Noble Phantasms? What isn't stated there is that the defense pierce only pierces 100% defense buffs. Siegfried has 200%. So even with a defense piercing Noble Phantasm, you're doing 0 damage. You actually have to stack defensive debuffs on top of Siegfried, on top of being able to pierce through defense. But even then, he also has 90% damage reduction, so any damage that you do to him is going to be reduced by 90%. Neither of these buffs are removable. You cannot remove that damage reduction, nor can you remove his defensive buffs. And to give you an idea of how ridiculous those defensive buffs are on him, let's say you're able to reduce his defense by 50% with a couple of debuffs. And then you have a Noble Phantasm that pierces through defense and does 50,000 damage. Well, only 50% of that damage is going to get through because he still has the 150% defensive buff. So that 50,000 damage is going to be reduced to 25,000. And then that 25,000 damage is going to be reduced by 90%, which means it's going to do a total of 2,500 damage. On top of that, he also has a skill that heals him for 2,500 HP, removes all debuffs, and charges his Noble Phantasm gauge by 1. So this is definitely a very tough fight, and you're definitely going to need a Noble Phantasm that pierces defense to even consider doing this fight. But there are a couple of advantages you have in this fight. First of all, there is a demerit on Siegfried's armor that gives you more Noble Phantasm charge than usual when you attack him. So you'll be able to NP spam pretty easily in this fight. The other major advantage that you have is that flat damage still pierces through damage reduction and defense. That means, for example, burn damage, curse damage, poison, divinity-based damage, all of that stuff still goes through all of his defenses. So if you have someone who's able to inflict burn on him that does 500 damage per turn, he's still going to take 500 damage per turn. One way to go about this fight is to try to inflict as much damage over time effects on him as possible. Just keep in mind, he does still have that skill that removes those debuffs from him and heals him for 2,500, making damage over time effects a lot trickier to use. Aside from doing that, the only other route to go through though is to stack defense down on him as much as possible, and then hitting him with a very powerful defense-piercing Noble Phantasm. The burn damage route is a lot harder, so I do recommend the defense debuff stacking route. As far as formation for this fight, I recommend having 2 supports and 1 damage dealer. You're going to need supports that can stack defense down and buff you at the same time. For your main damage servant, the best servants to bring with you are Emiya, Kintoki, and Lu Bu. All of them have class advantage against Siegfried, so they're going to do bonus damage. They also have Noble Phantasms that ignore defense, so they're by far the best options, period. You can also bring Herc and Cu Alter. They don't ignore defense, but their Brave Buster chains can do enough damage that they even hit through Siegfried's defenses, provided they have the max limit broken event craft essence and he has defense down stacked on him. Uriel and Orion can be usable to a similar extent, but again, very difficult to do it unless you have significant defense down on Siegfried. Defensively, you need Waver. Waver is absolutely 100% essential. Reason being, he has a stun, Noble Phantasm decrease, he gives you flat damage to use against Siegfried, he has an attack buff, he has a defense buff, he can curse Siegfried to do flat damage over time. He's just the best choice by far in every circumstance. You can also go with Shuten for defense down and stalling, as well as another damage over time effect, and then of course Steno because Siegfried is male. For Mystic Codes, I heavily recommend using the original Chaldea suit because it gives you a big attack buff, or you can go with Anniversary Blonde for the massive Buster buff if you're using a Buster Berserker Servant. So after you finish with Siegfried, your next fight is going to be against Medb. Medb is going to have 420,000 HP, the Celtic soldiers are all going to have 65,000 HP, but at the very end there's going to be 2 druids that are casters with 140,000 HP. Medb is going to have a number of gimmicks for this fight. First of all, she's going to inflict charm on all males as soon as they enter the fight. Even if you manage to remove this charm from your allies, she's just going to inflict it on them again on her turn. So that effectively means you cannot fight her with any male servants. Do not bring males to this fight. Her second major gimmick is she is stacked with defensive buffs. She's going to have invincibility and a 90% Buster, Arts, and Quick resistance, and she's also going to have 3 separate defensive buffs that increase her defense upwards of 50%. And all of these buffs are unremovable. In addition to all of that, she does also have a number of skills. Her first skill is going to be able to inflict target focus on a single enemy, which means she can taunt one of your allies. She can also restore 20,000 HP to all of her allies, and she can increase the Noble Phantasm meter of a single ally to max. In addition, the soldiers with Medb are also going to have skills that benefit her. They're going to be able to increase her attack and charge her NP meter by 2. The trick to this fight is that every time you kill a Celtic soldier that's one of Medb's bodyguards, she is going to lose a buff. She loses her buffs in a very specific order. First, she will lose her invincibility, then she's going to lose her arch resistance, her buster resistance, then her 3 defensive buffs, and then finally her resistance to quick. Which means until you kill at least 2 soldiers, you're not going to be able to do any damage to her. You also can't rely on Jack for this fight because Medb is going to have that 90% quick resistance for the entire fight until you kill the last enemy, which is going to render Jack's Noble Phantasm effectively useless against her. In addition, keep in mind that Medb's final 2 allies are casters with 140,000 HP, which means they're going to melt any assassins you have. Finally, I should mention that every time you do kill an ally of Medb's, they will give her a 30% attack buff. So you might want to have someone who can remove that on your party. So there is a quick and easy way of dealing with this fight, and that is to exploit the order of her buff removal. As I noted earlier, the first enemy you beat in this fight is going to remove her invincibility, and the second soldier is going to remove her arch resistance. There is an assassin that can pierce through defense and has an Arch Noble Phantasm, and that is Shiki. Which means the best way to go about this fight is to just kill 2 of Medb's allies and then have Shiki Noble Phantasm. The reason being, after the second ally dies, Medb is going to lose all of her resistance to Arch cards, and any defensive buffs that she does have are just going to be pierced by Shiki's Noble Phantasm. So the best strategy for this fight is just going to be kill 2 of Medb's allies, give that max limit broken white rose to Shiki, and just have Shiki Noble Phantasm right afterwards. Conversely, you can go with Jack if you want to, but if you're going to use Jack, you have to be able to kill all of Medb's allies, and it's very difficult to kill those last 2 druids at the very end. As far as the formation for this fight, I recommend having 1 attacker and 2 supports. Primarily, your main attacker should always be Shiki, and then you're going to want to have 2 supports that primarily buff her damage. As I mentioned, recommended servants for damage, Shiki by far the best option, Jack doable, but it makes it significantly more difficult. Defensively, Shuten, Mosh, and Jean are all great choices. Obviously, Mosh and Jean for the defense. Shuten can also clear the first 2 henchmen with her Noble Phantasm while also providing an AoE charm, an attack buff, and a defense down. So in my opinion, she's going to be the best support you could bring for this. But Nero Bride is another good choice for buffing, while Jack and Ibaraki are also good for this fight because they have buff removal, which will help get rid of the attack buffs that Medb gets. As far as Mystic Codes go, I highly recommend bringing the Chaldea Mystic Code because it's going to give you survival and a good attack buff. or you can bring Battlesuit because it gives you more versatility with the swapping, while also giving you a stun that can save you from Maeve's Noble Phantasm. Next up, we have trial number 6 against Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh will have 1.5 million HP for this fight. In addition, as soon as you enter the fight, he is going to remove all of your NP gauge, including NP gauge for your sub members. So everyone's Noble Phantasm gauge is going to be set to 0%. He will also inflict a unremovable debuff on you that decreases your NP strength of all your allies, including the ones in the back row, for 10 turns. And then finally, he is going to buff himself every turn for 20 turns. So every single turn, he's going to stack an additional attack buff on him, and all these attack buffs last for 20 turns. So what that means is literally every single turn that it goes by, he's going to get stronger. There aren't really many ways to deal with this fight. The first big major warning I have to give you is do not try to remove his buffs. If you try to remove his attack buffs, what he's going to do is instantly Noble Phantasm against you and then restore all of his attack buffs. Just let him stack his attack buffs, because the alternative is he's just going to wipe out your whole team. He's also resistant to debuffs, so you cannot stack attack down, defense down, stuns, and charms on him. He has higher resistance to those. So if you thought you can just offset his attack buffs with attack debuffs, or that you can remove his attack buffs from him, or that you can chain stun him, it's not going to happen. He is just simply going to be able to do more damage every single turn, and there's nothing you can do about it. After a few turns, he's going to be able to do so much damage that he can even kill your Lancers from full with a couple of crits. On the bright side though, he is susceptible to Scathach's stun from her Noble Phantasm, so that is a reliable way to stun him. In addition, he is going to be able to charge your Noble Phantasm gauge a lot because of his attacks. They hit multiple times, making your Noble Phantasm gauge charge a lot faster. The only real way to survive against his attacks is to rely on defensive buffs, guts, evade, and invincibility, and you just have to survive the onslaught. But keep in mind that Gil has a ton of HP, 1.5 million HP, and you have to survive those 10 turns before you can do any real damage to him with a Noble Phantasm. So the strategy for this fight is going to be survive for 10 turns while also whittling down Gil's HP as much as possible to the point where you can one-shot him after those 10 turns with your Noble Phantasm. To do this, you're going to want to rely on attack buffs and crits. Stalling is also crucial for this fight, so make sure you have a lot of defensive buffs, guts, invincibility, all the good stuff. In the case of Scathach specifically, because Gil can help build up your NP meter very quickly, you can even use Scathach's Noble Phantasm multiple times. Even though it won't do that much damage while you have the debuff on you, you should still be able to get the stun off, which will buy you an extra turn. Of course, it goes without saying, my recommended formation for this fight is going to be 2 supports and 1 attacker. You're going to need a lot of support to survive this onslaught, but you're also going to need a very heavy hitter as your attacker. I highly recommend for damage, you bring Scathach. If you don't have Scathach, get a friend with Scathach and give her that max limit broken White Rose Craft Essence. She's the best choice by far. She has a stun, she has an evade, and she's anti-divine. She's pretty much the only real thing that can take down Gil. If you don't have any access to Scathach, the next runner-up is Tamamo Lancer. She also has survivability with her invincibility, and she's anti-mail. Of course, Cu is also perfect for this. He is immortal, so put his immortality to the test. He alone can stall out Gil for multiple turns. You can also use Karna or Lancer Alter because they have heavy crit damage, and Karna in particular is anti-divine, but they have 0 survivability, so they're going to die very fast. You might want to use them to soften up Gil and then keep your main attacker in the back row. Defensively, you're going to need Waver, Mosh, and Jean. No questions asked, they're the absolute best ones here. Jean in particular is going to resist all of Gil's attacks and be able to give you invincibility to save you from Gil's Noble Phantasm. Hans, Irisveal, Leonidas, and George are great too. Leonidas and George have Taunt, which can buy you an extra turn. Anything that buys you an extra turn is perfect for this fight. Because remember, you need to survive at least 10 turns. So every turn matters. And that's why my recommended Mystic code for this fight is Atlas. Not only does it give you cooldown reduction so that you can give yourself more access to skills that have taunts or invincibility, etc., but it also gives you invincibility, which will buy you that additional turn. After all is said and done, this is going to be probably the hardest trial quest, but we still have one more left. And finally, we have trial number 7, the finale. This is just a straight up boss rush. You're going to be up against 6 different servants, all of whom have unique effects upon entering the fight and upon dying. They're going to be facing Jack the Ripper with 111,000 HP, Medb with 130,000 HP, Lancer Alter with 155,000 HP, Amakusa with 96,000 HP, Ozymandias with 164,000 HP, and then finally Nero with 258,000 HP. So the key gimmick for this fight, like I mentioned, is every time a servant comes in, they're going to have some kind of effect, and every time they leave, they're going to have another type of effect that buffs all of the enemies. Jack is going to reduce the buff rate of all your allies for 3 times when she enters the battle, and when leaving the battle, she's going to restore 5,000 HP to all of her allies, including sub-members, and this is going to happen every turn and it's unremovable. Medb, when entering the battle, is going to inflict poison on all of your allies for 1,000 damage per turn for 10 turns, and when you kill her, she's going to give the effect of 50% defense buff to all of her allies. When beating Lancer Alter, she's going to increase the charge of all allies' Noble Phantasms by 1 per turn. When Amakusa enters the fight, he's going to decrease the maximum HP of all his enemies by 2,000 for 10 turns. And when leaving the fight, he's going to increase the critical hit rate of all his allies, including sub-members. Ozymandias, when entering the battle, is going to basically activate Imperial Privilege for 5 turns. And when leaving the battle, he's going to apply short hit to all his allies, meaning all the enemies will be able to hit you through evade. Finally, when Nero comes into the battle, she is going to give herself Guts for 3 times, reviving her with 51,000 HP. She's also going to increase her crit strength and crit rate, which means she's going to crit non-stop. And if you manage to beat her before you kill everyone else, she's also going to apply Guts to everyone. So basically, every time you kill one of these bosses, they're going to make the rest of their team stronger. All of the buffs that they give their teammates cannot be removed, so the key to this fight is knowing who to kill at what time and in what order. For this fight, you're going to want to need someone who can remove enemy buffs and remove ally debuffs, because a lot of the skills that these enemies have can be removed. For example, Medb's poison effect upon entering can be removed, so you might want to have someone who has debuff removal, as well as Ozymandias' Imperial Privilege. So on top of your obvious main attacker and defensive support, make sure you have someone who can remove debuffs and remove buffs from enemies. But let's talk about the specific order you want to fight these enemies in. First and foremost, you're going to want to kill Jack immediately. She's a huge threat in terms of her damage. Jack should be your first target, followed by Amakusa. Reason Amakusa's second is because he can kill your entire team with his Noble Phantasm. Remember, his Noble Phantasm is AoE and removes all buffs, which means there's no way to dodge it. Even with invincibility or guts or evade or whatever, he's going to remove that from your party and then kill you. So you need to kill him before he can Noble Phantasm. Next up, you're going to want to take out either Lancer Alter or Ozymandias. Usually you're going to want to kill Lancer Alter first because she's likely going to be about to Noble Phantasm around this time, then kill Ozymandias. But before killing Ozymandias, make sure you remove his Imperial Privilege, otherwise he's just going to be too tanky to really kill. Conversely, you can also use someone who ignores defense to kill him, like Kentoki. And then finally, you're going to want to kill Nero and then Medb. You always want to save Medb for last. The reason why is because Medb gives the biggest buff to all of your enemies. She gives a 50% defense buff to everyone when she dies. All of that on top of the fact that people like Nero and Ozymandias have Imperial privilege that further gives them defensive buffs. It makes it almost impossible to kill them. So always, 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 always save Medb for last. The problem is that Medb is also going to be Noble Phantasming almost every other turn, because remember, she can charge her Noble Phantasm easily, but as long as you have someone who can survive Rule Breaker, you should be fine. Speaking of which, that means people like Cu and Herc are going to be a bit of a drawback here, because Medb can remove their guts and their evade with her Rule Breaker and just kill them. For damage, I recommend a Makusa. He's pretty much essential. He's great for this. He removes everyone's buffs. He takes half damage from them. He's perfect. You can also go with Cu and Herc. Just be mindful of Rule Breaker from Medb. In the case of Herc, Rule Breaker will not remove the guts that he gets from his Bondcraft Essence, so he's a little bit of a better choice here over Cu. You can also go with Kintoki for more damage. And even though I did recommend a Makusa, I don't recommend many other AoE servants because they're likely going to kill Medb. And like I said, you do not want to kill Medb. If you get to the final phase though, then I recommend using Gil, Emiya, Squirtoria, and Kuro. They're going to be ideal for the final fight against Nero because of their class advantage. And Jack and Ibaraki also serve a good place here as buff removers and high damage dealers. Jack in particular can come in a lot of handy for this fight if you can keep her alive all the way through, especially against Nero. Defensively, I think that Jean is absolutely recommended and perfect for this fight because of the invincibility that she grants. Waver is as crucial as always, as is Tamamo. You can also bring Martha because she removes poison and debuffs from allies and buffs from enemies. Medb Lily removes all debuffs and can keep your team alive. So can Irisfeel. Hans, as always, is another great choice. And then Shuten because she has an AoE charm that works on all genders. And finally, for Mystic Codes, I recommend Atlas if you're doing a one attacker setup, because it's going to be able to keep more defense on that attacker and keep them alive longer. If you're doing a 2 attacker, 1 support setup, then go with Battlesuit. You're going to need the versatility for swapping. There's going to be an AoE attack buff for offense and a stun for defense. And with that, the final battle is done. And that about wraps up everything I have to say about the exhibition matches. And I'm sorry guys for the length of this video. I have not even edited it yet, and I'm sure it's crazy long. But honestly, I couldn't make it any shorter. I've tried. So forgive me for that. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments and I'll try and help you. I imagine a lot of people are going to have questions on how to deal with these fights, so I'll be happy to help with you guys in the comments below. If this video did help you, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more FGO content. Follow us on Twitter and on Twitch, and also join the party at our Discord, and I will see you all in the next Servant Spotlight or event guide or whatever, and I'll see you guys next time. So we're only out. Later.